So with that, I'd like to introduce our next panelist, next speaker. We have the sort of extraordinary honor of actually having Scott Cook join us from Intuit. I think, Scott, I don't know if you can join us in video. So Scott, are you there?
Yes, I am. I don't know why my video is not showing up, but I am here.
So your voice is mellow and wonderful. That's terrific. You must be a good speaker. Have you turned video on, or I don't know if you've been promoted to panelist? I just want to make sure that we get to see you as well. You're very animated. It'd be wonderful to have you join us video as well.
The FaceTime, the heads-up display is checked. The green light is on for my camera.
Is there start video in the lower left of Zoom?
Yes, and it says stop video because I already started it.
Clicking back and forth on there. I don't know what's going on for technology there.
Stopping it?
Otherwise, I'm going to have to make facial expressions for the two of us. I'm not sure I'll be able to do that.
I've stopped it and restarted it, and it seems to be still puts me in the dark.
How odd. I don't know if the technology team can help work with that in the background. Well, maybe they can work with that while I do a more extended introduction or something of that sort as we try to bring you in more fully and more formally.
Please be brief and merciful.
This is going to be fun, Scott. All right, this would be terrific. So those of you who know Scott, he's the founder and for 11 years the CEO of Intuit, a $7 billion corporation with almost 10,000 employees. Many of you probably even have used their software, Mint, Quicken, TurboTax, QuickBooks. One of the things I should point out about this is that he founded Intuit to help solve his wife's challenges managing the finances. So this is a message for all you husbands out there. See, if you take care of your wives, you can start $7 billion corporations. So this is a good message for all of us. Scott met his wife at Procter & Gamble before Intuit. He's currently on the boards of Procter & Gamble, Harvard Business School, Intuit Foundation. Actually, he graduated Harvard Business School as well. We won't hold that against him too much from MIT. So we still welcome you into the fold, Scott. Scott also is an active cyclist, and he likes to scale mountains on that. And he claimed that they're a member of the Over the Hill group, but he's clearly too active for that to be the case. And to share a little bit more of a story on that, we've been trying to get Scott to this event for years, and it took a global pandemic to finally slow him down enough that we could actually get him to join us. So it's with great pleasure, and great trepidation, I now introduce Scott, because I know he's going to start running away with the show. So with that, Scott, give you a minute to introduce yourself. I hope even if we can't see you, we can hear you.
So Marshall, you might need to dance a little bit longer because I believe Scott is restarting his Zoom.
Ah, okay. So restarting the Zoom. Oh, he
Let's
didn't
see
even
you dance.
Okay, all right. So I've got to see if I can give a little more background on that. So I think Scott, your mute is still on. At least I see the red icon. I think you're trying to relaunch or resume on that. So Scott, you there?
I am. I just, on the suggestion of your team, I exited and came back, and seems we have the same situation.
How odd. How odd. Well, you certainly sound mellifluous anyway. I can continue to.
Well, I'll give you a choice. What I would normally do at this point is to reboot the machine, because when you have computer problems, that's often the solution, but that's a 4-minute delay. So you can have me in the dark or have me try to reboot. Your choice.
I think we'll keep you with us,
Okay.
just to keep again. I'll see if I can make expressions for the two of us. I've got very wiggly eyebrows.
Well, on your introduction, I have to say that my wife was first intrigued by me when I called her, and she had done radio in college, and she said, "Oh, he has a great radio voice." So your opinions may vary, but we'll get to try the radio voice now.
Ah, you crooner, you. Okay, so that was one of the things that really helped on all of this. So anyway, I'd given the introduction that you were, several boards, actually also doing some social entrepreneurship with the Intuit Foundation in education, medical research, microbiome, and other locations. So we've got a number of things that we can actually go on. One of the things I know, after having founded Intuit, you are familiar and intimate with the founding stories for Facebook, eBay, Airbnb, Catalan, Wikipedia. Share some of your learnings on how to get these things off the ground. These are hard businesses to launch. What are your tips and what are your war stories on getting these platforms off the ground?
Yeah, there are some common patterns that I've observed as I've spent time with the founders of a number of the successful multi-sided markets and network effects that we are so amazed at today. I think the Airbnb story has a number of the interesting elements. Hold on, I'm just getting a message from your team. Okay, they have a theory. Let's try a theory here.
So does the theory have an application?
No, it says turn off other apps such as Facebook, FaceTime, which is off. So that doesn't.
Well, that's interesting. If another program is hijacking the video feed, that's possible.
Right. Okay, let me just try another. Maybe another.
Although I worry if the other system, you might then still have to relaunch Zoom if that were the case, because I worry that we'd have to re-hijack. That may be the case. Something else that hijacked the video feed.
Okay, well, let's go radio. The Facebook, excuse me, the Airbnb story has a number of similarities to others. They actually didn't code anything to start with. In fact, they tested their leap of faith assumptions sequentially and using non-code methods. So if you think of the leap of faith assumptions, you'd have to believe that people would sleep on airbeds in other people's homes or apartments. It's two sides. One, would people actually volunteer to sleep on an airbed in somebody's home or apartment? And also, would anyone with supply volunteer to have somebody come and sleep on their floor on an airbed? They tested that one, would there be supply, themselves by providing that half of the market themselves. They put up a website at a conference announcing that the hotels were sold out for the conference, but they had space on their floor in their own apartment, the founder's own apartment, to see if anyone would actually come and rent that space. And by God, somebody did. And they tested that more than once. In fact, one of our employees at Intuit was one of the ones who rented that airbed in the original apartment that the founders were living in.
No, that wrinkle I had never heard, that Intuit had been an insider literally on the ground floor.
Yeah, well, he hadn't joined us yet, so he was a free agent at that time. Then, having shown that that if there's supply, that people would rent out airbed space, they then wanted to see, would there be supply? So they went to South by Southwest, and in advance of that, they tried to sign up people with apartments and homes to see if they'd rent out space on an airbed in their apartment and home, and that worked. Now, interestingly here, so far, there's no code involved. They kind of did all this by putting up a little simple website and hand matching. Then they got involved with Paul Graham at Y Combinator, and he talked to them about their business and said, do you have many customers? And they said, oh, just a few. He said, well, where are they? Well, more of them are in New York City than anywhere else. And Paul Graham said, well, what are you doing here in Silicon Valley? Go to your customer. Go spend time with your customer. Go observe them. Get connected to your customer. So they got on an airplane and went back to New York and started going to the few supplies, the few people who were offering their places, and visited them. And one thing they saw right away was that while the places, when you physically visited, were good to stay, appealing to look at, the photographs that the owners had put up on Airbnb made the spaces look dingy. And they said, oh my God, people aren't going to rent this place. It's much better in reality than it is in this dingy photo. So there they came up with the idea of, well, why don't we hire a pro and take really good photos? And which they did initially themselves. They themselves got a good camera and took really good photos. And then they saw the liquidity of the market just take off. And they look back to that move to professional photographs for the owners as the turning point in the growth of Airbnb. So what are the kinds of lessons that you see in the pattern? One, test things, if possible, fast and without needing to build any code. Test your leap of faith assumptions that way. Another is provide one half of one side yourself, if possible, as they rented out their own space. Another is go to the customer, spend time with your customer, understand what's happening, and you may see big insights that you've missed so far. And I think the last lesson is, remember, they started with just airbeds, hence the name. You had to have the renter on an airbed, and it's grown far, far, far beyond to fabulous experiences. And I think that's the last lesson, that the platforms done right, and maybe with a good bit of luck, can turn into something far more vast than anyone could believe at the beginning. And I think that's been true of Facebook, Uber, operating systems like DOS and then Windows. So those are a set of stories that, set of lessons that I've observed.
So those are fascinating. So if we look at a company like Facebook, you could actually see engagement happening pretty much from the get-go, from Harvard to Ivy League schools to corporations. So engagement was pretty high from the beginning.
Yes.
But an interesting case in Airbnb's example was it took them a couple of years before they really got traction.
Yes, it did.
So it's intuitive, and again, if I remember correctly, one of the venture capital firms, I think it was Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures, kind of tossed them out, saying, strangers sleeping on the couches of strangers, you're going to have all kinds of mayhem happening.
Yes.
It was not an obvious business. How would you know to stick it out in a case like that?
Well, this is what entrepreneurs bring, the gift, or maybe the madness of great entrepreneurs. So many of the most important businesses we admire and respect today looked like fool's missions at the beginning. At Intuit, we were told that our original concept of Quicken was crazy. Lots of companies had already done that, and they had, and our product was inferior to those products. And it was measured by features. We had very few features, and our competitors who were on the market had lots of features. The guys at Google were told their business idea was stupid, that you want to be a portal like Yahoo. You want to have everything. You want to hold users. What are you going to do? Search? It's already been done. And heck, when a customer comes to your search, as soon as you help them, they go somewhere else. Well, how are you going to make money doing that? Uber, Lyft, so many, even the original people at Apple, investors said, well, most people said, well, why does anyone need a computer, a personal computer? So in hindsight, that seems incredible, but at the time, so many of the big inventions that change our lives often seem crazy and fool's missions.
So you've had some really interesting challenges as you made the platform shift at Intuit. One of the questions that we get all the time in discussions with firms is, well, should we let competitors into the ecosystem? If I recall correctly, Intuit struggled with that question, and you had an answer. What was that answer, and how did you get there?
Well, I think there's lots of struggles that successful incumbents have who've made their success in product businesses. There's a number of challenges when you then want to become a success in platform businesses. And we definitely had it. So QuickBooks is a tremendous product, and we had the vision of turning it into a platform. Yet we had huge opposition from within our company, because in addition to selling QuickBooks, the business bookkeeping system and accounting system, we also sell payroll, our own payroll. And it's the most popular in the country, but still it has competitors. And our payroll group didn't want us to open QuickBooks up to the likes of ADP or Paychex. And our payments group didn't really want us to open up QuickBooks to the likes of Square or PayPal. And we finally just had to declare that we want to make sure our customer gets their choice of the best stuff they can get. And if that's not ours, we don't want to deny them getting to the best stuff. And if our own in-house businesses can't compete effectively to capture the business from our customers. Given the advantages of being in-house with us, they don't deserve the business. So that's why we're going to open up to companies who make businesses that in some fashion might be viewed as a rival. But that was only one of the challenges when it comes to becoming a platform company. Yeah, one reality is the corporations have antibodies, and antibodies, it's a topical subject nowadays, come up when a company tries to do something radically different. The natural antibodies from the tradition, the core, the incumbent part of the business say, oh, don't do that. That's little, that's stupid, that won't work. Give us the resources. So we found you have to ring fence and either hide or rigorously defend new things to keep the natural corporate antibodies from consuming it.
So those are great strategies for getting going. I know it's a real challenge for existing businesses to make those transitions. I know that you also had an additional challenge that was quite interesting. So as you may know, Jeff and I often describe platforms as inverted firms, where the value is created on the outside. It scales well and incredible power where you get to harness third-party resources, but there's a downside. Sometimes you worry about third parties not producing value. So I know in your case, you created a marketplace for financial advice, but these aren't professional financial advisors. How do you solve a problem of maintaining quality control when you're opening an ecosystem like that and having third parties create the value?
Yeah, this was one place where the antibodies were particularly strong and clearly would have decimated the internal startup. So we had a team of 2 engineers, and they were in our TurboTax group, and they observed that at the time, this is 10 years, 12 years ago, that we answered technical questions from taxpayers, like how to get the printer to work, but we didn't at the time answer tax questions. Now we now do, and that's a separate 2-sided business called TurboTax Live. But back then we didn't do that. So the engineer said, well, why don't we build a kind of an open contribution system so that TurboTax users can ask questions of any kind as they're doing their taxes. And then any consumer, any taxpayer can answer those questions. And that way we can get answers to our users who have questions about taxes themselves, which we as a company were not at the time answering. Well, this was fought tooth and nail by the tax experts at TurboTax because they said, well, you've only a tax expert, only a licensed and certified person can answer all the questions on the subtleties of taxes. Those answers will be wrong. Those answers will ruin our reputation, they'll ruin our brand, and they'll ruin consumers' trust in our business. And so they had effectively the tax experts within our company, who are honest, hardworking, tremendous people, but come from their background that only an expert can do this. They had effectively blocked this from happening. Fortunately, we, as I said, you either hide something in a sandbox, hide it away so people can't find it in your company, or you have to have executives swing in. Unfortunately, the division GM and I swung in to defend the right of the team to run the test. So they were allowed to test this concept in our lowest volume SKU of TurboTax, about 1% of total volume. And I'll admit, I was pretty convinced it would fail because I didn't think we'd get liquidity with only 1% of the customer base. We wouldn't get enough people answering the questions. The questions would go unanswered. But by God, it actually worked. Volunteers from our customers started answering about half the questions. And we had our own people answering the other half. But to get half of them answered out of the gate in a super small test was remarkable. And even more, the answers were generally good. And if there was an answer that wasn't right, it got corrected by other users, kind of a Wikipedia effect. But we didn't know if we could pull it off at such a small volume. So it actually worked. And questions were asked and answered that we had never been able to answer before. So then with that success, it got expanded into the rest of TurboTax.
Oh, that's a really interesting story. I love the Wikipedia effect that even if there's a wrong answer, it gets corrected so that you can actually even in some sense clarify confusion that will have taken place.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that's fascinating is that these platforms, once they succeed, are such extraordinary success stories. But there are a lot of platform failures. It's often quite challenging to get them off the ground. So there's always a danger of seeming too much like a cheerleader for platforms. So I want to just ask you, for this audience, what's an open, honest case? What might you have done differently? Have there been other things that you were surprised in an unhealthy way about the launch of a platform? What would you have changed?
Well, I think we have one currently which hasn't succeeded the way we thought. And yet we're still trying. It has succeeded in a different way. We started as a platform. And then after multiple failures, we've reconstituted it as a product, but with the dream of having it become a platform. But we haven't proven the dream yet. So this is in the area of small business lending. So QuickBooks has deep data on 5 million businesses in the US, deeper data than any lender has ever had. Powerful data because we have the fundamental books of the business. And so we tried 3 times to open up a lending marketplace with small business lenders on one side and QuickBooks users on the other side. And we used other intermediaries who were already in the business. We tried it ourselves. A big problem we encountered was that the lenders, so these are typically banks or alternative lenders, had already built their underwriting engines to use the data that they already had available. And we came to them and say, hey, we've got new data. In fact, we've got better data than you have. But they didn't use it. And it turned out they had underwriting models they'd already developed and validated using not our data. And they were very reluctant to go through the long process to validate new data. So they kept lending on the old data and basically just wanted us to be lead gen, not actively part of improving their underwriting.
Wow.
And that was just so frustrating. It just minimized the power. I mean, I understand where they were coming from. They had a proven way of working, and they didn't want to invest in developing a new way of working. So we decided we needed to prove that lending on our data worked. So we went into the lending business ourselves, which is not what we'd ever planned. And we got the board to approve a fund so we could have losses and started lending on ourselves and started really building it out. So now we moved into, for example, PPP lending just because it's relevant to the times we're in. And our system now is pure digital end-to-end. It takes the customer about 6 to 8 minutes to apply for the loan, for the business loan. We approve in 10 minutes for 83% of the applications. And then we fund that night. So you have the money in your bank account the next day. So that's what we've been able to do digitally, but only because we had to provide one side ourselves. Now we're hoping with this model working, we can now use it to encourage others to do the kind of lending we're not going to be able to do all kinds of business lending. That's what financial institutions are for. So there are some things where, at least for us, we found the platform approach failed. And we've had to do something else, at least as an interim step on our journey to a platform.
Wow. Okay. No, that's a great story and how some of the lessons is, and then just the changes in the data and the changes necessary in the business model to take advantage of that data is actually quite an interesting lesson. I know there's something else that you've been engaged in, and I know you've been sort of moved more in the direction of social causes. And you had an interesting story about platforms moving in the direction of social good and social causes. Can you tell us a little bit more about Danish and some of the other things that you're involved in? Maybe the Too Good to Go as an example. What's happening?
Yes. A group of 5 guys in Denmark, maybe 10 years ago, wanted to attack the problem of food waste. And this is particularly food waste from the food service or industry and consumers. So if you run a buffet restaurant or a cafeteria, at the end of the night, you've got a lot of leftover food and it gets thrown out. You're a bakery, end of the day, you've got stuff that is no longer, by tomorrow, won't be fresh. It gets thrown out. Grocery stores with deli departments, same thing. Estimates are that 30% of food is wasted, thrown out. So they said, well, let's build a two-sided market where folks who have the excess food on one side and consumers who want to buy food at 70% off on the other side, and then mediated by a mobile app. And that's called Too Good to Go. Interestingly, a proven entrepreneur, Danish woman, learned about it on a bus ride from a passenger sitting next to her in Copenhagen. And she said, wow, that's phenomenal. She went, investigated the company, and came in and said, I'll invest and I'll be CEO. And the founders said, okay. So she's been running it for the last 7, 8 years. And it's now in 15 countries in Europe. Heavy on app downloads, and it gets heavily used. And it basically turns trash to cash for the restaurant, bakery, deli, and now grocery stores. And they've got some of the biggest in Europe: Carrefour, Lidl, Starbucks, and it's a profit-making business. They take a cut on that 30%.
Wonderful observation. It is interesting. One of the things that platforms are especially good at is actually increasing the efficiency of resource utilization. You actually take the transactions cost and boost turnover. And so it's actually interesting how much social good might we be able to do by tapping spare resources and actually bringing them into the economy in a useful way.
I'd add another quick example. These networks also can allow you to work around institutional barriers. So there's another one that I just learned of in the last 2 weeks called OutSchool, and they allow teachers to form their own classes, charge for it, and deliver classes online. And they now have teachers who make hundreds of thousands of dollars in pay by having such popular classes. And this is middle school and high school classes. And one thing I've always dreamed of in my social enterprise side of life is, why aren't there millionaire teachers that are so phenomenal that they can serve a large audience and make vastly more than, you know, a public school teacher who's kind of a cog in a system. And it's Teachers Pay Teachers is one of these two-sided networks, and OutSchool is another. And so I think we're finally seeing great teachers being able to reach large audiences and be paid in accordance with the benefit that they produce.
I think it's a wonderful example. And it'd be really nice, you know, speaking as a professor, to have academics and teachers actually earn more for, you know, for some of what they do. And it'd be nice to even see the high school and middle school action. I think, you know, millionaires in there would be really an interesting example. We're actually peppered with questions by audience. So let me give you 3 quick ones, and you can take what's good or what you would like. So one of them is, you're on with Procter & Gamble, you've been there before, you're on the board. Why hasn't Procter & Gamble done more with platforms? They still seem to be focused on products rather than platforms. A second question would be, you know, what advice would you give to other leaders, you know, as they start to launch new ventures? You know, if they're trying to actually do something like what you did, what advice would you give them? And the third would be, how does Intuit handle collaboration among the third parties? You know, is there conflict among them? Is there do you orchestrate the activity among your ecosystem partners? So those are 3 quick questions before we're at the top of the hour.
Yes, let me start with the middle one, because I think it's the most generalizable. Advice to leaders. And let me give advice to leaders in a successful incumbent firm that's traditionally been a product or service firm. I think if you're going to become a player in platforms, other than and not a vassal to a platform, if you're going to become a platform owner, that's going to require leadership from the CEO or from a major division, a president or GM, without having a champion, a protector. The corporate system will grind down your and eliminate your ability to do something as different as being a platform company. And you're going to have to personally, I mean, we do this at Intuit. We'll have team meeting, and there'll be a barrier somewhere, and we'll get on the phone and say, hey, Louis, you got to help this team. They need it. I want you to do it. And Louis was putting up some barrier, some well-meaning corporate policy that was perfectly meaningful for a product business, but didn't work for a platform business. So it's going to take that intensive championship and proactive championship. Probably one of the best things to do, as we talked earlier, is to try to hide it for as long as possible. That way you don't arouse the corporate antibodies. And many of these things can be done started at very small scale, very rapidly. I mean, we talked about starting without any code at all. Catalent not just tested, but went live with no code. And this is a two-sided marketplace between MBAs and consulting projects, trying to essentially disintermediate the McKinseys of the world. And they started as a student project at HBS, and they went live with a WordPress web page, and then behind the scenes, the founding guys, who were all MBA students, would make all the matches by hand. So you can get some of these started with no code or low code. You know, keep in mind that Piero Midyar coded the code for the launch of eBay in a 3-day weekend, and Mark Zuckerberg coded the code to start Facebook over spring break, though there may be some debate about pre-existing art in that case. But often the code requirements are quite low for many of these, because, as you said, so much of the activity happens off the platform or outside the platform. And then make sure you staff it with people who are truly entrepreneurial. And that's a breed you have to, look for in your corporation, the people who can have that kind of entrepreneurial vision and stick-to-itiveness and see a vision different than what the corporation has traditionally seen. So those would be quick tips. On P&G, I think actually their biggest challenge has been to get back to being great at being a product company. As you can see from their business results throughout the early part of the teens, they fell behind their rivals in doing the core business that they're in. And under David Taylor, the CEO, who's been in place for about almost 5 years, he's done a spectacular job at getting P&G back into being the leader in their businesses that they were, the leader in innovation, in customer understanding. So I think that was job one for them. You can't go into a new business if your current business is failing or is struggling. You just won't have the gumption to do something radically new. And I think that's been their challenge, and now their success with David. And now they're looking at some things that that could turn into something we'd talk about in 5 years.
That's a big deal. That's a huge change. So I think that brings us to the top of the hour. And so, Scott, I want to thank you for this. Again, the conversations with you are always genuinely interesting. There's so many other things, in fact, I'd like to explore and go follow up on. What else could we invest in? What else could we actually go do to help change the world? I think, you're helping to lead that. And it's always great to hear from you and what's happening in that space. So again, we're all indebted to you, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to, Marshall.